Welcome back. You're watching Global Today here on Morning Prime, where we continue pace with the conversation regarding Israel and, of course, Palestinian warring faction right now that is ongoing. Today being the 19th day. And we are looking at the current state of play, especially just stepping back to history as well, and also where we have the rallying call from the Palestinians from the river to the sea, where this has been depicted to be anti-Semitic, and there's a rising of anti-Semitism as well. And where we're bordering right now, of course, we have the media not really leaning on both sides to just give a different picture on the ground as well from Israel and Palestinians, as it has been showcased as well. And this is what also Moshe is speaking up with us as well. We continue pace. We just want to hear from Peter Kagwanja, and then, you wanted to say something, then we hand it over to Peter Kagwanja.
Yeah, Dabal, since this conflict started on the 7th of October, Israel has dropped 120 tons of explosives on Gaza, which is equivalent in terms of power to the atom bomb that was dropped by the Americans on Hiroshima in 1945. Wow. On just this small area, entirely occupied by civilians. 120 explosives have gone on top of those people. And they have nowhere to escape. There's no ability to escape. And so you can imagine the impact of this conflict on civilians, innocent civilians in Gaza since the 7th of October. This is a war crime, and it's a violation of international law. And the Secretary General has spoken about it a number of times. And it must be addressed by all law-abiding, peace-loving citizens around the world. A ceasefire to protect the civilians of Gaza is now. And the same thing is happening, although we're now focused on Gaza. Killings are happening in the West Bank. Israel is pushing the settlers, the colonial settlers who are occupying the West Bank, which is recognized as part of Palestine, pushing civilians out of the way, killing young people, innocent civilians, to make way for these settlements that are, again, against international law.
All right, let's hear from Peter Kagwanja.
Well, let's start by recognizing some of the sober voices that are coming from some most unexpected area. For example, Obama, and I've read his article, and it is very, very sober article. The statement by the United Nations Secretary General Guterres is also a very sobering, statement. I mean, and therefore, conscience is beginning to pride us that this is not business as usual, that this is not war. I think we need to begin doing comparison as scholars between the war in Ukraine and the war of Israel against the Palestinians in proportional terms, and to begin to see the kind of conclusions we'll be reaching. My tentative one is that the war now in the Middle East is worse than the one in Eastern Europe in terms of damages and the havoc being wreaked on the people. And what is happening in Israel reminds me of the book by the Ugandan scholar Mahmoud Mamdani. And Mamdani, that book from time to time comes to my mind when victims become killers. And it goes back to the psychology of the oppressed. When the oppressed gets power and when the oppressed gets positions, that they use the same technology, the same tools and the same tactics against their own victims. And it takes us back to, again, the Second World War, and why Hitler is famous or infamous. He's infamous because he introduced the concept of total war. And total war here is war that is, I said, to be fought against an enemy, but essentially you are killing civilians. That's essentially, that was what Hitler was about. When he was killing 6 million Jews, they had no state. Therefore, he was not fighting against the Jews. He was simply killing civilians. That's it. 6 million of them. Now, when he went and, drowned children, British children, in the ocean, using the submarines, he was not fighting against Britain So simply killing children. So, and that is why Hitler became so infamous as a person. So we are back to the concept of total war in the Middle East. That's essentially it. We are back to the total war. Why is it total war? The attacks, if you look at today's, the papers, everywhere, it is a bomb in a refugee camp. Who attacks refugees? A bomb in the hospital. Today we are told there is only one hospital, the Indonesian hospital in that part of the world, which is functioning, and it has no power and has no, has no energy, no nothing. Meaning even people to heal from wounds, they can't. If you are wounded, you are wounded. Now it is an attack on civilians. That's why it is total war. This is not total war in the sense of the Second World War, war by Hitler against the rest. This is a very unequal war, because it's like saying Uganda and Kibera are at war, or Uganda and Korogocho are at war, because those who know Gaza, those who know West Bank, these are proportions of Nairobi. It is like you say Kibera. That's what you call Gaza. Then you move to Kawangware. That's now you can call West Bank. That's what there is. And that's where you are dropping the bomb, the most concentrated places in the world. We want to withhold the use of the G word, which is genocide. But essentially, when you drop the kind of bombs we are talking about in a concentrated area, what is the outcome? So we want to say that in the future, I think countries like Kenya and others need to be very careful how we now begin to respond to this situation. Because in this situation, we are going to see the emergence of Israel as one nation and no Palestinians. Because this is what happened in 1948. There was no state called Israel. The war came out. You attacked Lebanon and elsewhere, and finally a state of Israel emerged, and the Palestinians were displaced. What is the logical consequence? And that's what the economist is asking. How does this game end? This game might end with there not being any Israelis, maybe any Palestinians, in any state that can be called a two-state solution. So that the idea of a two-state solution to the Middle East becomes basically a good word, a good phrase. The reality of it is that there are not two states to occur, because these people have been pushed either into exile, others have been exterminated, and there is no state. What needs to be done? I think countries like this, and I think what Dr. Hananja said earlier on, that as Kenyans, we need to be very careful. Otherwise, we're going to get numerous solidarity attacks from outside the countries because of positions we take. The position we take here is that Israel deserves to live. It has the right to be there as a state. That's a clear position. Two, that the self-determination of the Palestinians also need to be recognized, and that this war must end with Palestinians having their state, not losing what they already have. Because what I fear is that the Palestinians are not only going to lose their lives, we are now talking in statistical terms about how many lives have been lost. What we are not talking about is how much territory and how much of their land they are going to lose. The leveling of these civilian houses is not, to me, is part of a calculated business. That there is no settlement. So rebuilding, who is going to be the new settlers now that the settlers have been exterminated by bombs? Who is going to be the new settlers? So let the world not stand by and watch as we see the disappearance of a people. The only remaining part of the Palestinian land is now disappearing. At the same time, let's ensure that the future of Israel is guaranteed, because the only guarantee of the future of Israel is the support they get from the neighbors, as they have been getting from the United Arab Emirates, from the Sudan, from others. That to me was giving the sense that the future of Israel is safe. With this development, I cannot say the same, because even those who have been worn up to the idea that it now must be business with Israel are now going to retract or face some backlash within their own countries. So the point is, I think we need to watch very carefully that we are not standing by and watching the disappearance of our people and the disappearance of their territories. That would be very sad for us. It would be a broach in our conscience.
Okay, broach in our conscience, but why aren't you addressing the issue also of the red, from the river to the sea, because that is still just a moment. Let's hear from
let me speak on that.
He's not really spoken, so I want us just to give a equal chance to everybody.
That specific issue,
because
let me take it out of
that
the way.
There's a morbid fear also from the Israelites.
Let me take it out of the way quickly.
Yeah, let him just speak so that we can come to you, please.
No, Diba, thank you very much for the views that I've heard from my colleagues. Away from the international posturing, and away from the bilateral efforts supporting either side, truth be told, this is a very complex situation. A complex situation that has been a result of long-drawn, creation and recreation of identities, national or otherwise. And the most important thing that we need to talk about now is the bloodletting, the senseless, careless bloodletting that we are seeing. Earlier on it was Israel, 1,000 people death. Now we are seeing the Palestinians, basically civilians, almost being exterminated, as my colleagues are putting it. What we have failed to see is the spirit of live and let live. The spirit of understanding that you cannot answer violence by violence, because what you get is more violence. Really, that's the reality of basically human history when you look at it. I've said in this forum before that violence will always beget violence. The Palestinians are people. Their rights are human rights. The Israelis are people. Their rights are human rights. So whichever way you go, whichever side you support, you will always stand condemned in some way. That's why I agree with my colleagues that as a country, we need to be cautious in terms of taking sides in a very complex, conflict. We have already seen before, and Hassan referred to that, and I referred to this last time when we were here. Kenya has suffered for taking certain positions, for example, in support of the Israeli cause in this conflict before. I talked about the bombing of the Norfolk in the 80s. Kikambala is still very fresh in our minds. To some extent, the Westgate incident that we had last time. So I think we call for sobriety in the world. Of course, we talk about so much about national interest for each nation that is supporting which side. But I think, in my view, human life and its value exceeds any national interest that you can talk about. Doesn't matter whether we are talking about the national interests of the United States, we're talking about the interests of the African countries. Let's put human life first. And humanity should be condemned by any right-thinking person, in my view.
All right. You wanted to say something regarding that?
Yes, I wanted to speak on the issue of, using propaganda to deny the existence and the rights of one group or another. In the case of Israel and Palestine, there are two extremists. There is an Israeli extremism that believes that the whole of the Holy, the so-called Holy Land, is the land of Israel, and anybody else who's living on it is an intruder who must be removed by whatever means necessary. And the current government of Netanyahu has elements in it that believes in that very reactionary and dangerous perspective. On the other hand, there are also extremists on the Palestinian side people who feel dispossessed, pushed out, and feel the threat of extermination. And they are also calling for the destruction of the other. But I have seen that there is a policy line that says if you criticize the actions of the Israeli government, you're anti-Semitic, which is not the case. We must separate the fact that there is the government of Israel that violates the rights of its own citizens and the Palestinian subjects. We must separate it from the hate campaign, anti-Semitic campaigns such as hate against Jews as a community who have suffered quite a lot through pogroms, extermination, and the Holocaust in Europe. And we should not allow that. And the Jewish people are not necessarily completely representative of Israel's repressive actions, nor are most Palestinians representing an extremist position. For example, the PLO, the Palestinian Authority, recognized the right to existence of Israel. But Israel has not reciprocated. They are putting settlements, colonial settlers, onto Palestinian land in the West Bank. They are pushing Palestinians every day. They're killing young Palestinian people in the West Bank as we speak. They're not reciprocating the relationship that the government of Mahmoud Abbas has extended since the Oslo Agreement of the 90s. So it is Israel that is refusing to engage with the Palestinians, to find an amicable relationship. It is Israel that is threatening the existence of Lebanon. You heard the Prime Minister himself of Israel threatening the existence. He says, if you do this, we are going to exterminate you. We're going to do what we did to you before. We're going to finish you off militarily. Lebanon is a small country.
But you're speaking directly to Hezbollah, not Lebanon as a...
No. We
need to uncouple these things as well, because Hezbollah is a terrorist group.
But he didn't. If you play his clip again, he's threatening the destruction of Lebanon. He's attacked Syria.
It was very clear.
Yes, very, very clear. He is using the language of the Nazis when Hitler was speaking about the Jewish people, of extermination. So there are extremes on both sides. But in reality, I think we must reject anti-Semitism. We must reject hate based on race, religion, or culture. But the same should be reciprocated when it comes to the Palestinian people. Are we just going to watch the destruction of the Palestinian people because they happen to be against people who cannot be criticized? So Israel can be criticized as a state.
All right.
We should not shape our argument as anti-Jewish or anti-Arab or anti-Palestinian. That is hate, and that is not acceptable.
Just a footnote on that, because the language of anti-Semitism is a Western discourse in the United States and so on. When it comes to the Middle East, there is no anti-Semitism, because the Arabs and the Palestinians and the Jews are all children of Abraham. In fact, this is the battle of the firstborns, Isaac versus Ishmael, and because Abraham had other children anyway, and that's neither here nor there. But the whole issue is, both when we talk about Semites,
and I think that's where we have it wrong-headed, that it's been a battle between Isaac and Ishmael from the beginning.
No. We are saying,
and this is what you're trying not to spew out and mislead many people that this is a Ishmael and Isaac battle, and it's a Muslim and a Christian thing.
Let's not lose the point.
Indeed.
The main point is that the idea that if you're not for Israel, or you're criticizing Israel, you are an anti-Semite. The Arabs are also
you're going to be silent.
So, in other words, that discourse should not play there. What is at issue here is, how can two people, brothers or whatever they are, coexist peacefully and not resolve their dispute or differences through war? Because that's what we are saying here. But it is not a battle of ideologies. I remember you asked me about pushing this from the river to the sea.
Indeed. What does that mean?
Eventually, I mean, it means that the Israelis from River Jordan all the way up to the Mediterranean, that you want to push them to the sea. The way we used to say during the colonial times that we want to get the British, the Indian Ocean, and the others to the Portuguese, and others to the.
So how would you decipher that?
No. I mean, of course, as Weshimiwa put it, they are extremists on both ends. What wins is the vital center, the sober center. Mm-hmm. That's what wins. And we're saying within the Israelis, they are extremists who would want to create a Jewish state from the entire area, even the one occupied by the Palestinians. Those are the extremists. On this, the Palestinian side, I mean, what Hamas did was abhorrent. You know, you come and attack a people when they are celebrating, and you kill 1,400 people in a day, carry hostages. That's not right. So Israel's endeavor to defeat and possibly destroy Hamas is legitimate. It's a very, very legitimate cause. But the killing of civilians, the bombing of civilian residents is what is at issue. That's all.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's see from, because I heard you also mentioning the New York Times with the editorial. I lost the track of thought. What you
there was the New York Times, I think yesterday, we published yesterday with regard to the hypocrisy. Because the interesting thing we were discussing with African scholars in Beijing is, you know, for good or for worse, when President Xi was trying to pull the world together, President Biden was trying to move in the Middle East to divide the world even further. Mm-hmm. Now, the New York Times spoke to the perception in the global South of the hypocrisy of that because the West have called on much of the world to support, especially from moral grounds, what is happening, to support Ukraine because of the perceived, of course, aggression. And Kenya's position, of course, is clear when it comes to, territorial integrity and stuff like that. And, you know, I think Ambassador Kimani gave an eloquent speech at the United Nations. But you can't keep, of course, conflating the two. Now there's an emerging recognition, even though there's sort of overwhelming bipartisan support, for instance, in the United States Congress, for increased support, you know, for Israel in that part. Now, you can't have your cake and eat it too. This moral equivalence is something that needs to be removed. And I think an average Kenyan and an average African, they think there is a nation state or a republic called Palestine, and there is another one called Israel, and therefore this is just, you know, two states fighting. No. Number two, even under the Ottomans, and any scholar can come and we can challenge me on this, and we can go back.
But what would you say?
There've always been Jews in the Middle East. It's important to understand that. Mm-hmm. Okay. And even when the Jewish Fund was set up, from the first Basel Conference 1897, of course, borrowing from Theodor Herzl, what I call the father of modern Jewish state in terms of the thinking of it, okay, to encourage the Jews, especially from Europe, in part because of the challenges they were facing, the pogroms and stuff like that, to move into Palestine. They were always the Sephardic Jews of the Middle East. Yeah. Most of the ones who were coming in were the Ashkenazi Jews who were coming from Europe. And of course, now increasingly later on in the 80s, we can see the Falashis of Ethiopia, you know, join the thing, in part because of the Eretz Israel, the principle, you know, Greater Israel. And for those who want to suggest that Jews and Arabs have never lived together, they just don't understand history. Because within that territory, we had Jews, we had Arabs, but then you had Christians, you had Muslims, and you had those who subscribed to Judaism for millennia, you see. And I think that is something that is normally lost. That's why we say it is not exactly about religious. But when you able to whip up religious connotations and stuff like that, it becomes an easy mobilizing tool. We have seen it even in this country. We have seen it in Shakahola, and we see it Al-Shabaab doing the same thing. But fundamentally, to give a picture, in the 30s, only about 20% of Palestine was actually Jewish. The partition, however, in 1947-48, gave more than 60% of the land to 20% of the population. And then 20% of the remaining 30% or 35% of the land to a overwhelming majority, 80% population. That, of course, also spoke to the initial rejection of the initial partition plan. And then in 1967, it expanded extensively. Right now, and I can challenge any person who is watching, go and look at territories right now occupied by Palestinians and tell me if that is something you can actually form a state. You can't form it. And so we condemn the acts, especially of violence against civilians. But if we can't stop running away, if we keep running away from the cause of that, we've seen this thing. You cannot shoot your way out of terror, especially if it's informed by certain grievances that haven't been addressed. In this country, we're trying to do things differently, even dealing with extremism. It's the reason why NCTC exists. We've deployed lots of soft power in trying to address some of these things. Now, within the Middle East, and especially between Palestine and Israelis, they have not solved that. And what you have, you're having an apartheid system. You're having an occupation. There's a reason why they're called Palestinian refugees. Why? Because from 1948, they were chased away from what was Palestine, which is today Israel. And 1967, even a further 300,000, 750, then 300,000 were pushed away, you see. And if we don't really recognize this thing, there is no way you can defeat an ideology or a people determined to free themselves. And that is why the closest country that aligns itself with the thinking, especially of Palestinians in this country, is South Africa, in part because it's coming from the same environment. That does not justify any harm done to the Jewish people who have suffered for many years in Europe. Mm-hmm. These are people, the same people who were denied even entry into the United States during the Second World War. But your previous suffering does not justify oppression of other people or apartheid against another group. I think it needs to be
so should there be a boycott of some of the products from Israel, as it's being called for by, South Africa, being led by Malema, Jacob Malema, and the EFCP party, and other countries as well, which are calling for the sanctionings of Israel at the end of the day?
Dabal, there is a fight against history in this propaganda war. Because the reality is that when the state of Israel was created by the British colonial system that occupied Palestine at that time, and with the push, with the terrible, the horrendous extermination of Jews in Germany by the Nazis, there was a push to create this state anywhere in the world. And then it ended up in Palestine, where there was a historical connection. At that time, the idea was to have two states. But because of the conflict and because of the pressure of Western countries in support of Israel, that never happened. There are hundreds of resolutions at the United Nations, the General Assembly and the Security Council, that have declared that there is an urgent need for the creation of this two-state system, where the two communities can live side by side. There has been many mediations leading to the one of the most successful breakthroughs, which is the Oslo Accords. All of these attempts have been aborted by right-wing elements in Israel because of the belief that the whole of Palestine belongs to Israel and to Israelis, and Palestinians have no right. 750,000 people were removed from Palestine by Israel in 1948. They leave now. A third of the population of Lebanon and half of the population of Jordan is Palestinian. Yes. They are refugees. Gaza itself was part of Egypt. And the Palestinians who were displaced from the areas occupied by the Israelis moved there as refugees. Mm-hmm. It's only in 1967 that Israel reoccupied Gaza. They occupied the West Bank. They occupy East Jerusalem, which is considered under international law as part of Palestine. And now they're ethnically cleansing East Jerusalem. They're removing people literally from their houses and turning them into permanent refugees. They are pushing settlers into the West Bank. So this problem does have a history. It didn't happen on the 7th of October. And while people are pushing to say Israel has the right to defend itself, what about the Palestinian people? What do we expect of them? What should they do? Should they disappear from the face of the earth? Should they all end up in refugee camps and cease to exist? So this is the contest. This is the contest that is being shrouded in this smoke screen of propaganda that is entirely focused on an unfortunate and a terrible event that happened on the 7th of October. That does not make the history of Israel and Palestine. It is a much deeper history, and it requires a more comprehensive solution than just boycotting Israeli products or whatever. Mm-hmm. We are facing a major crisis here, and I don't know whether you have read or you know about Tom Friedman.
Yes.
Tom Friedman
He's
a famous columnist and opinion influencer who writes for the New York Times. He has written a damning opinion in the New York Times on Sunday. And this is what his chilling conclusion was. He says, "The hour is late. I have never written a column this urgent before because I have never been more worried about how this situation can spin out of controls in ways that could damage Israel irreparably, damage United States interests irreparably, damage Palestinian irreparably, threaten Jews everywhere and destabilize the world. I beg Biden to tell Israelis this immediately for their sake, for America's sake, for the Palestinians, for the sake of the Palestinians, for the sake of the world." This is a very seasoned, hardened American Jew,
yes,
who feels that in fact the Gaza crisis, the Gaza conflict, is going to put the whole of the region on the brink of regional configuration, a war that could have a dire consequences for humanity, not only for Palestinian and Israelis. Are we insane now to push for this concept of the right to defend, pounding Gaza out of existence and massacring, mutilating, and destroying its population? Under our watch, we are now this is 2023. This is a new world.
Thank you.
We said never again.
All right.
But now we are seeing a genocide happening in our lifetime right now in Gaza.
Okay. We've had also a lot from the New York Times with Thomas Friedman, also reading the editorial as well, the sentiments, but also New York Times were the first to come and tell us that the bombing of a hospital in Gaza was from the Israeli rockets. And then they backtracked on that as well because that was not established.
Because the consequences.
Because it was not established that it was from the rocket of the Israeli. This was misfiring of a Palestinian.
We don't know that.
It was established.
You've taken sides already.
No. I'm just saying the other side of it. Because the mine is just to put it on the table. Then you say, we'll agree with it or not.
You've already made your mind.
I've not made my mind. I'm just saying the other side has also said this was misfiring from Israel. So I leave it. So we cannot just take hook, line, and a sinker. Even a publication that is coming from New York Times that will be but
this is opinion.
The sound truth at the end of the day. It is opinion. Editorial 2 is an opinion.
No.
At the end of the day.
Sorry. When we're commenting his opinion, what you're stating a fact. Okay. So in terms of bombing or who is the cause, it's not an opinion, it's a fact. And so whether it is this or that, it is something factual. When discussing Tom Friedman, is what he's actually thinking. So we're using New York Times is not going to be, we're not going to be crazy.
The yardstick, yes.
Yes. So I think we need to distinguish those two.
All right, and I think we need to. Okay, let's hear from you then.
There's always a context in reporting, and the New York Times exists in a certain socio-political environment. Their denial is understandable.
Yes.
Really, when you take into account the environment in which they are existing. But to answer your question more directly about the boycott of Israel, if I'm allowed some latitude, I will use an analogy that it's not very effective to treat cancer using Panadol, a painkiller, really. That's just a waste of time. Because boycott of Israel by, let's say, South Africa, as you suggest, Malema has been making quite a bit of noise about that, is not going to change much, because there will be those countries that will still support Israel. And we have a dichotomy that characterized apartheid in South Africa, where some countries supported the apartheid regime and others opposed it. So that will end up being a zero-sum game. What we are looking for is a world that recognizes that life is being lost in the Middle East. And that life is the life of either Palestinians or Israelis in this conflict. We say in my language that war has no eyes. So it doesn't see who it's going to destroy, really, if you look at it very critically. What we need is a world that is security conscious, knows that if we are not extremely careful, this situation will worsen and end up in the Third World War. I'm not a prophet, and I'm a historian. Somebody has said if historians are prophets of the past. But when you look at the way things are unfolding and the alliances that are emerging, if we are not very careful, things will slide into a situation where we are going to have a Third World War.
Okay, we're just about to wind up. A few minutes just to go, but I wanted just to pick up what also we were talking about with Joe Biden and the Middle East, where they met with Saudi Arabian Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salim on Tuesday to discuss efforts to prevent the Israeli-Hamas conflict from widening. And the White House said they agreed on a call to pursue broader diplomatic efforts to maintain stability across the region and prevent the conflict from expanding. The White House said, adding that the two leaders will remain in close coordination. Biden and the Saudi Crown Prince welcomed the delivery of humanitarian assistance from Egypt into Gaza and recognized that much more is needed for civilians to have sustained access to food, water, and medical assistance, according to the White House. They both welcomed ongoing efforts to secure the release of hostages held by Hamas and called for their immediate release. The White House added, Biden and the Saudi Crown Prince affirmed the importance of working towards sustainable peace between Israelis and Palestinians as soon as the crisis subsides. The White House said, adding they will be building on the work that was already underway between Saudi Arabia and the United States over recent months. Biden and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken have said they thought Hamas's October 7th assault on Israel that left over 1,400 people dead was in part motivated to disrupt a potential normalization of ties between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, home to Islam's two holiest shrines, and its blessings to Gulf neighbors United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, establishing relations with Israel in 2020 under the U.S. administration of Donald Trump. I just wanted us to pick up on that. Do you think this is, as they take it, to disrupt the normalization of U.S. and Saudi Arabia? And can we also juxtapose this with where Iran is playing into this? And people are saying that Iran furtively has been steamrolling this particular war between Israel and Palestine.
You want to go first? Go first. Yes. At the timing of it, of course, is going to raise a lot of eyebrows, because I think Riyadh and Tel Aviv were about to move in the direction of what many thought was going to be normalization of relations as a building on the Abraham Accords, that was a deal that was struck during the time of Donald Trump. Now, this can be seen as a way to disrupt it. Now, for Iran, Iran has found allies, or let's say Hamas or Hezbollah found allies in Iran, in part because the leading, for instance, Arab countries, had more or less kind of abandoned the Palestinian cause. They've not been at the forefront of pushing it, and as you know, I think that it was an opportunity. It's not just Iran, because even Turkey is very sympathetic, to the Palestinian cause in general, and so this can be seen as a way perhaps to torpedo the entire process. But considering that this attack was not planned yesterday, apparently it goes back 2 years. It's been in the offing, perhaps it's just a coincidence, because to be able to execute something like this, you need really a lot of planning. And to be able to beat the Israeli intelligence, which is one of the best, in the world, it is something that is unimaginable to actually a lot of people. And so, perhaps just to close, make my closing remarks. Israel is a strategic partner to Kenya. First of all, let's not get it wrong. We still have engagements in education, in security, in exchange in agriculture, and there is plenty that Nairobi can be able to learn from Tel Aviv. But it's also a nation, and I'm saying a nation, not a country. It's also a nation that has suffered extensively from the pogroms and persecution, for years. That, however, does not give them a license to commit murder or to oppress other people or to deny other people the right to exist, the same right that they actually fought so hard for. Remember, the Jewish people in Palestine, there was a group that used to attack the British that was also called, Haganah, terror group, you see. And they used more or less the same tactics. They killed many, perhaps not to the scale in which nowadays we see because of advanced weaponry and stuff like that. And so, for us as a country, because we have to come back home ultimately, I think it's going to be very important how to deal with this. Right now, the international political environment is very hot, and living within the region we live in, we have to be very, very careful, because there is likely to be a backlash against not just Israel and American interest, but against probably potentially our interest if we are seen, for instance, to be extremely biased in our approach. Two, I suggest either way that Kenya should be on a lookout, because right now there is a heightened risk of some actions, especially terror groups exploiting this kind of environment to do harm to us. And so how we think we navigate this for us is going to be important in determining whether we're going to remain safe or whether we're going to be insecure in the days and months to come.
All right, but when we talk about atrocities from Israel, and we've seen on social media, some of them cannot even actually be put on television because they're barbaric. They're just man's inhumanity to man. We've seen, and this is what people are not really talking about. And I know you're privy to it. Some of the families where we had the Star of David are earmarked on the doorposts of the Jewish people, right? But the Palestinians, going and raping women. I mean, some of these stories we can't even just relate them on television because they're purely. You'll wonder why people are saying even animals cannot be this worst. They've not seen that. I mean, that's what side of a human being. The machete and all that. Those are things now that actually we don't want to put it on the media because it is just going to, at the end of the day, exacerbate and compound the entire situation as it is. But it is barbaric.
Well, we can't justify.
That's what I'm saying. We can't really justify.
Here's the thing. The truth is, we never see images that are coming from Palestinian places and what is happening to them for the last 70 years. I think it's important because we never really get to see. But nowadays, with social media, these images are actually there. And if you saw them, a lot of times we're going to have a different narrative in the way we actually report.
But what I'm trying to say, it doesn't really help when we try and push the agenda that we're not seeing pictures from Palestine, we're only seeing pictures from Israel. And I think even last time we were here, we were saying, oh, this is like the Lex Talionis, right? An eye for an eye, actually, as you quoted Mahatma Gandhi, it will just make the whole world blind. That we don't need to actually now be saying, okay, so since you have this picture, you can countermand it with this other picture so that we have an even kill. But it's still evil that we're spewing at the end of the day.
Yes.
That is what I wanted to put forward. But I wanted just, even as we're winding up, because we talk about the Abrahamic Accord, we had the Oslo Accord, and there has been that the reason why Oslo Accord was not really holding is because Oslo Arafat, the late Arafat then, was invoking sort of what was a story history of Prophet Muhammad, bless his name, when he, when he had a treaty and that there was the Mudabayen. That is the Mudabayen that also happened with the Oslo Accord as well. Those are things that maybe you can actually say, did it hold? Was it because of the Arafat side that never kept the part of the Oslo Accord as well? Briefly.
Yeah,
you can take us through that particular treaty.
The Oslo Accord was incomplete. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm simply going to summarize.
So we can pick it up next week.
That was the closest we came. But of course, you saw what happened immediately after that. The Israeli Prime Minister was assassinated. It's got to be, if you remember that.
Yes.
And then the conditions did not exactly improve in certain parts of Palestine, leading to the first Intifada, and then of course in the second Intifada. And because of the expansion of settlements and the contentious issues, of course, in the early 90s was the right to return of the refugees, you see. But then progressively, as more territory was taken, it became apparent that you can't establish a Palestinian state, period. For you to do that, you have to literally do land trade, have a lot of Jewish people, settlers, move back, because most of these people are settlers. Since 1993, you have around 600,000 Jewish settlers who moved into West Bank, and they've taken over land was previously occupied Palestinians. And so unless you change that equation, it's going to be impossible to actually create a Palestinian state. And for Kenyans who have gone to school and know how to read and write, I would like you to go and see the progressive development or expansion of settlements, which are against international law. That is why even Washington, that is fully supports the United States, Israel, says we need to be able to stop the settlements because it's a barrier to peace.
We need to wind up. Let's hear from you, Dr. briefly.
Very briefly, Dibal, accord peace agreements based on fairly subjective identities that have been recreated over the years will not hold in any water. And if you ask me, just like my colleagues are saying, we respect the nation of Israel, and we have had relationships with Israel as Kenya in different sectors, which he has highlighted. But we need to appreciate that the isms, whether it is nationalism or self-determinism, that supports their cause, are isms that also can apply to the Palestinians. So the philosophy that needs to guide us is just live and let others live. And I believe that fundamentally will actually solve the problem that we have, the crisis that we have in the Middle East. Yes, the boundaries have been pushed. The Israeli settlers have settled in Palestinian lands. But history is replete with examples of resettlements that have been done to accommodate southern identities. The example is what we saw in South Asia. At the same time as Israel was being created, India and Pakistan, the way we know them today, were created on the basis of the Islamic and the Hindu identity. And the two countries exist today. We need to be accommodating.
Thank you. We are closing remarks, Peter Kagwanja.
Yes,
30 seconds.
Very quickly. We are witnessing two models of dealing with disputed territories and disputed identities. We have Morocco, Western Sahara, we have Tibet in China, and now we have Palestine in the Raja Israel. The models of approaching these are different. In Morocco, they are developing the West Sahara out of existence. In Tibet, they have done the same.
Thank you.
Israel is essentially bombing Palestine out of existence. Completely different model. So I wanted us to look at those two models and see what is sustainable in regard to ensuring that the Palestinians and the Jews exist side by side.
Right. Dr. Kanenje, your closing remarks? Or you'd given your closing remarks?
No, I thought I had, but I would say this. We would rather sweat.
We'd rather?
Sweat in peace.
Sweat in peace.
In search of peace. Yes. Than to bleed in war. Because war doesn't benefit anybody. And being partisan is never a solution to a conflict.
Indeed. Right. Dr. Ari?
Well, the same thing. Let's talk peace. Let's respect international law. Let's respect human life. And this world is meant for all of us. No one was put here to exterminate others. Whether we are talking about Palestinians or we are talking about Jews, we have equal rights to live in this God-created world.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. I know this is a very deep discussion regarding the warring factions there, developing story. We shall be delving deeper into it as well. And thank you also for your valued company. On behalf also of Yusuf Hassan, who is a member of the delegation of Defense and Foreign Policy and Foreign Relations, and also Intelligence and the National Assembly had to leave early because remember also the vettings of the new ambassadors that were appointed actually begins today. It began yesterday, it continues today, so he had to leave being part of that particular committee. Thank you guys, I really appreciate it. It's always a treat. Picking your brains different and steeped, of course, in wealth of knowledge as well. We really do appreciate. Thank you for your valued company. I will leave with what some of the Goatee Records producers said, and they had a song, they say, color don't hate, people do. Religion don't hate, but people do. Thank you for your valued company. You've been watching Global Today. His dad is up next.